Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. In a debate about the 7 principles of public life, I think it's fair to preface my remarks by saying that the recent history of this government has been at best tempestuous. And that is the context within which this debate takes place. And with your permission, Mr Chair, I will try and summarise what has brought us here today. And probably the most important thing, I mean, we know we've got crony COVID contracts, and we know that we've got the illegal prorogation of Parliament, but probably something that touched the public more deeply than that was the lockdown parties. The lockdown parties that the former Prime Minister knew nothing about, which he then admitted that he knew about but didn't attend. But then he admitted he attended but didn't realise they actually were parties. And this was a saga which pushed the credulity of the public beyond comprehension and beneath the dignity of the very office of the Prime Minister itself. And I know that some members of the Tory benches think that we should all move on. It was in the past. Let's forget about it. But there's no denying that people across the House of Commons, on both sides of the House, and people across the UK, regardless of their political persuasion, felt by turns very angry, let down, betrayed and even mocked by this behaviour from a Prime Minister who told us we could not be with our loved ones to help prevent the spread of COVID and to support the NHS. And people, by and large, followed this advice, even when their loved ones were dying alone, and even when loved ones were suffering with terrible loneliness. They followed this advice even when it was very difficult and distressing to do so. And people did it because they believed it was the right thing to do. For their Prime Minister to so casually, to so blatantly have been found to have not followed this advice, his advice, was very, very hard for many people to bear. Now, understand that we face a crisis. We face a crisis in energy prices. We face a cost of living crisis. We face deeply worrying levels of inflation. But truth and honesty, when Prime Ministers take to the dispatch box in the House of Commons, really matters. For people to believe that their leaders can look them in the eye and say things to them which are not true, or if they feel that they simply cannot trust what their Prime Minister tells them, how much harder is it to govern, to effectively lead through times of dark crisis? Now more than ever, people across the UK need leaders they can believe in, and the legacy of Partygate is that the office of the Prime Minister has been badly tarnished and is a threat, ultimately, to democracy itself. And that's perhaps why we're even having this debate today, it seems to me. There can be no doubt that the previous Prime Minister's tenure showed just how important the Nolan Principles truly are. Selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness and honesty. The underpinning of the principles of the survival of democracy itself. Standards in public life matter. The ministerial code matters. Trust matters. But this is not just about the impact of Partygate. We've also witnessed what attempts to rewrite the ministerial code with declarations that it would be disproportionate to require ministers who breach this code to step down, that it would be more in keeping to ask them to take a pay cut or make a public apology. Yet Lord Evans was clear in his report recommending reforms following a review of the ministerial code by the Committee on Standards in Public Life. It is of paramount importance that ministers give accurate and truthful information to Parliament. This is self-evidently true and shouldn't even be considered remotely controversial in any state which believes itself to be a democracy. And yet, chillingly, breaking international law was removed from the code in 2015. the overarching duty on ministers to comply with the law, including international law and treaty obligations, and to uphold the administration of justice and protect the integrity of public life was changed in 2015 to an overarching duty on ministers to comply with the law and to protect the integrity of public life. There can only be one reason why the commitment to comply with international law and treaty obligations was removed. Presumably, the intention is and was to pick and choose what international law would be complied with. And what do we find? The then Northern Ireland Secretary admits to the House of Commons that the Internal Market Bill breaks international law, but only in a specific and limited way, allowing ministers to make regulations inconsistent with the UK's obligations under the withdrawal agreement, laying the groundwork for much more extensive breaches of international law and seeking, importantly, to insulate ministers from judicial scrutiny at home. And most extraordinarily, the Internal Market Bill's provisions on international law and those on domestic law could have legal effect, notwithstanding their incompatibility with any rule of international or domestic law whatsoever. This appears to be an attempt to oust the jurisdiction of the courts to review the legality of ministerial decisions under these powers at all. Now, we have a new Prime Minister, and she must get a grip of the moral decay at the heart of government. Lord Geidt left because he was put in the impossible position of having to arbitrate over flagrant law-breaking. Of the 4 ethic advisers there has ever been, 2 have resigned under the tenure of the former Prime Minister. The same Prime Minister whose last honours list appears to be full of presents for cronies and pals, putting them into positions of lifetime peerages, unaccountable to the public, whilst they themselves scrutinise legislation. How to recover this damaged trust, this decay? It won't be easy, but I believe it can be done. The new Prime Minister could do what her predecessor failed to do. While her predecessor refused to give the then Independent Standards Adviser, Lord Geidt, the power to launch his own investigations, as requested by a number of ethics bodies, the new Prime Minister could provide such power to independent standard advisers. At the moment, as we've heard, an independent investigation into whether the ministerial code has been breached can only take place if the Prime Minister approves it. And even then, the findings can be completely disregarded. That cannot be right. But the fear many of us have, and we've heard it today, is that matters will not improve. The new Prime Minister has said that she may not appoint an ethics adviser. That would be a terrible mistake. I understand that her reasoning is that this is not necessary, as she has always acted with integrity. But surely, even if you believe that, even if you accept that argument, but surely in politics, perception matters. Sometimes in politics, perception is the only thing that matters. And the perception will inevitably be that a stubborn refusal to appoint an ethics adviser, given recent history, means that it will be business as usual and will do nothing to restore confidence that the principles of public life really matter to this government. So it would be a squandered opportunity for the new Prime Minister, who was at the heart of her predecessor's government, if she fails to show that she will take a new broom and sweep away some of the dubious ethics of the previous leadership. Otherwise, I think we all know, trust in politics, in the business of government, will continue to erode, and that damages the very fabric of our society. It damages the cohesiveness of our communities, and ultimately, it threatens democracy itself. That helps no one, it benefits no one, but it harms everyone.